Hi guys, I'm Burrard-Lucas, wildlife photographer, and if you're into photographing wildlife or any distant subjects, then you're probably interested in a telephoto lens. And Sony now has a fantastic new option in its telephoto range in the 400 to 800mm zoom. And so in this video I'm going to compare this new zoom lens with two of the existing options, the 200 to 600 and the 100-400. We'll go over the handling, the weight, the size, the performance and the features of each lens, and ultimately which lens is likely to be best suited to you. So let's start with an overview of these lenses. The 100-400 G Master is an f/4.5 to 5.6. It's a telescoping zoom, so as you zoom in, the lens gets longer. This means that when the zoom is retracted, it is by far the most compact option, which makes it great for packing in a bag and traveling with. It's also the brightest option. It lets the most light in, so you can get the fastest shutter speeds. But of course, what it doesn't offer is quite the same zoom reach as these lenses. This is a maximum 400mm. You can extend that with teleconverters, but these other two offer greater reach without the need for teleconverters. Now the next option is the 200 to 600. And this is an internal zoom. So as you zoom, the length doesn't change. So it lets in a bit less light. This is an f/5.6 to 6.3. So you can't get quite as fast a shutter speed as you can with the 100-400 unless you put your ISO up, which can introduce a little bit more noise. So really this is ideal when the light's good, but in low light, you're going to get slightly better performance from a lens with a wider aperture. And now the longest lens, the 400 to 800. So it's giving you a lot more reach than the 100-400 and even the 200 to 600. So this is ideal for those far off and small subjects like birds, for example. So this is an f/6.3 to f/8. This is also an internal zoom, just like the 200 to 600, and it's got a very similar form factor and feel. If you glance at them quickly, you might not even realize that they're a different lens. And it's only when they're side by side that you can see there's a small size difference between the two. So when you're using these lenses and handling them, there's an obvious difference between a lens that telescopes and a lens with an internal zoom. A telescoping zoom, the lens extends as you zoom in. This means it's smaller to pack, but as you zoom, the whole balance of the lens shifts forwards, which may mean you need to shift your hand position to keep it nicely balanced. And also the zoom action is much tighter and less smooth. And it can sometimes be a bit annoying because if you hold the lens pointing downwards, it can sometimes extend on its own. And so for that reason, you might want to tighten the zoom using this dial, which stops that from happening, but now makes it much stiffer to zoom. The internal zoom, in comparison, is really light and easy to shift. And the whole lens stays nicely balanced as you're zooming. The zoom on this is really light and very quick to shoot from 400 to 800. It looks to me like maybe 30 degrees gets you all the way from 400mm to 800mm. So you can be really nimble and reactive when changing your framing and changing your zoom. Both of the internally zooming lenses have their zoom ring in front and their focus ring behind, whereas it's the other way around on the 100-400. I find that the way these are balanced, my hand can reach both rings without having to shift my grip. Portability wise, as we've already said, the 100-400 is a much smaller lens to pack. I weighed and measured all these lenses already and jotted down some notes. So the 100-400 comes in at 1.61 kilograms or 3.55 pounds. And when packing it, with its lens hood turned round, it's about 220mm, 22 centimeters long. The filter size is 77mm, and the diameter of the lens hood is about 116mm. When fully extended with the lens hood on, it's about 37 centimeters long. So the 200 to 600 is 2.43 kilograms, which is about 5.36 pounds. The length with the hood round is about 414 millimeters, and when packed it's about 336 millimeters. so 34 centimeters. The filter size is 95 millimeters, and the diameter of the lens hood is almost 13 centimeters. The 400 to 800. This weighs 2.77 kilograms, which is about 6.1 pounds. The length with the hood is about 45 centimeters, and when packed with the hood turned round, it's about 37 centimeters. The filter size is 105 millimeters, and the diameter of the lens hood is about 15 centimeters. So overall, the 400 to 800 is only about 14% heavier than the 200 to 600 and only about 3 centimeters longer. It's a bit wider at the front, which means you might need a deeper camera bag to fit it in comfortably. But other than that, it's not going to feel like you need a significantly larger amount of space to pack it. So interestingly, the 200-600 and the 100-400 have feet that you can remove. So you can loosen them with the wing nut and then slide them off. The 400-800, however, has a fixed foot, which you'd have to unscrew if you wanted to take it off. And I think that's because this lens is a bit heavier, and if you take the foot off and you have it on the camera body, you might be tempted to hold the weight of the lens just by holding the camera body, which can put stress on the lens mount. And so I think by making the foot so that it's not removable easily, Sony's encouraging you to carry the lens using the foot rather than using the camera body. Image quality wise, all three of these lenses are very good. The 100-400 being a G master lens, as opposed to these two, which are the more value-oriented G range of lenses. The G master should have slightly better image quality, but in practice, it's very hard to notice. Also, things like the build quality and weather sealing are likely to be to a slightly higher standard in the G master. Again though, not something that you can perceive very easily when you're handling these lenses. Another advantage of this lens is that it focuses closer than the other two options, which allows you, when you're close to small subjects, to get a more frame-filling shot. The 100-400 has a minimum focusing distance of about 1 meter, which gives a magnification factor of 0.41. The 200-600 has a minimum focus distance of 2.4 meters, which then at 600 millimeters would give you a magnification factor of about 0.25. The 400 to 800 millimeter lens has a minimum focus distance at 400 millimeters of about 1.7 meters, but that increases to about 3.5 meters at 800 millimeters. Effectively though, the magnification factor stays around the same throughout the zoom range at around 0.23, 0.24, that sort of level. So this is an f6.3 to f8. And so it starts at 400 millimeters, you're shooting at f6.3, and then at around 485 millimeters, just before 500 millimeters, it transitions to f7.1, and at about 590 millimeters, a bit before 600 millimeters, it transitions to be f8, and then it's f8 all the way up to 800 millimeters. Now, the longer your focal length gets, the more small vibrations or movements in your camera are magnified, and so the effects of camera shake are magnified. So that means as your focal length increases, you need to use faster and faster shutter speeds just to counteract that additional camera shake that you get through the longer focal length. And so the combination of needing a faster shutter speed and the fact that you can't use such a wide aperture means that you'll have to use higher ISOs on this lens in order to get sharp photos. Now, in the past, that was a big deal. But these days we can afford to think about it a little bit differently because the latest Sony mirrorless cameras have such good high ISO performance that actually you can just push your ISO up to counteract needing that faster shutter speed and using a slightly less fast lens. And at those higher ISOs, you're not getting so much noise that the images aren't still perfectly usable. And that then, in combination with also advances in denoising software on your computer, means that really we can push the ISO to levels that we never could have dreamed of 10 years ago. Another step forward in these latest lenses is that the optical steady shot, the image stabilization, is so good that that also allows you to use slower shutter speeds. And so that's another factor that means that these lenses are more usable today than they ever would have been in the past. Having said that, this lens does still let in a lot more light. You can get much faster shutter speeds with the 400. So if you don't need that extra reach, and you maybe are going to be photographing more in low light conditions or fast moving subjects where you need fast shutter speeds, then you will get an edge with a faster lens like the 400. These two lenses are very close in terms of their maximum apertures. The 600 is slightly wider at an equivalent focal length. The 200-600 is f6.3 at 500mm, whereas the 400-800 is f7.1. So a very small speed advantage with the 600. A much bigger consideration for anyone using these lenses is more the reach. So which of these lenses is right for you? I think for travel photography, where you want to be fairly light and nimble, and you probably don't need the extreme reach of these lenses, I think the 100-400 is probably the lens you'd be looking at. It's got incredible image quality, it packs down small, and it still gives you some very good reach going all the way up to 400. Choosing between these two lenses might be a bit trickier. This lens is 5 years newer than this, which I think does come with some advantages in terms of focus speed and maybe a slight edge in image quality as well, but they're pretty close in that respect. So really it's that zoom range and which one you're going to find more useful. I think if you're mainly focusing on wildlife, distant subjects, and you need that reach, you'll probably find the extra reach of the 800mm is noticeable. There's probably not many people who would be shooting at 600mm quite a lot of the time who then wouldn't benefit from being able to go up to 800mm every now and then. However, where I think things are a bit less obvious is when you go to the other end of the zoom range. This is 200mm at its widest zoom, whereas this is 400mm. And so this going from 200 to 600 is actually a much broader zoom range, and the look of a 200mm photo versus a 600mm photo is actually very different. Whereas 400 to 800, it all falls in that quite far telephoto range, and you're definitely not getting quite such a versatile lens, I would say. So I think if you find you want to often zoom out, maybe capture more context in your photos, maybe photograph larger animals as well as those small birds, then maybe the more versatile option is the 200-600. So then the decision might come down to what you're pairing these lenses with. So the 400-800 could actually pair really well with the 100-400, which then gives you that entire zoom range covered from 100 to 800mm. You could then also pair that with a 24-105 or 24-70 to cover that wide angle zoom range in just 3 lenses. The 200-600 on the other hand, that would pair perfectly with a 70-200mm lens, which then gives you that entire range from 70 to 600mm covered. You could then add a 24-70 to get 24mm all the way up to 600mm covered without any gaps. Alternatively, you may be able to get away with just 2 lenses if you use the 200-600 with something like the 24-105, which just gives you a small gap between 105 and 200mm, but otherwise gives you a very nimble 2-lens setup. The 100-400 could pair nicely with a 24-70 or with a 24-105, and then maybe combine that with a 1.4 or 2 times converter, and that does give you the option of that extra reach, albeit at the expense of some light. So a 1.4 converter on the 200-600 would give you a 280 to 840mm lens, so a bit longer than this. If you were to put a 2 times converter on here, it would be f11 to f13 for a 400 to 1200 zoom range. So extreme focal length there, but at the expense of quite a bit of light. Now you could also put the converters on this lens. You get extreme focal length then. A 2 times on this would be an 800 to 1600, which is practically a telescope. You still get pretty good autofocus performance. Obviously you lose a fair bit of light, but if you're shooting in good light, then using teleconverters with these is perfectly viable. So certainly another option to consider. So which of these lenses is best for you? Well, if you're looking for something for travel, you want something that packs down light, that still gives you plenty of reach, but also has added versatility, for example, that close focusing distance that will allow you to get closer to small subjects, then the 100-400 is a very good option. It gives you excellent image quality, a very compact form factor when packed, And it also is the fastest of these lenses in terms of the shutter speed it will let you have. However, it is significantly shorter in terms of focal length. It's also a telescoping lens, which, while having the advantage of being easy to pack, does mean it has some disadvantages in terms of how it feels to use. It does pair very well with teleconverters, so add a teleconverter to this option and you've got a 200-800mm lens, but that would cut out a lot of light and it would actually make a slower lens than this. So if it comes to choosing between these two lenses, obviously the focal length at the maximum zoom range is what is most obviously going to set them apart. And I think if you're the sort of shooter that might find that you're mostly using a lens like this at 600mm, you're probably going to find that extra reach of 800mm useful. With the 200-600, you maybe can get away with just having a 24-105, and you've got quite a lot of zoom range there covered in just two lenses. The 100-400 is similar. You could probably pair this with just a 24-70 or 24-105 and have a two lens setup. Whereas I really think this one, you're probably looking at a three lens setup unless you're just focusing on the telephoto stuff. I hope you found that comparison useful. If you'd like to see more, then I also did a field test video for the 400-800mm in which I took it on safari in Namibia. And I also did a field test video of the 200-600 when that first came out, which you can also find here. If you'd like to see more content like this, then please remember to subscribe. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.